Hey, what is going on everybody, and welcome to Fantasia. For today, we're going to be jumping into another session of Epic 7 now. Today, got some more balance adjustments for you guys. I know, I'm a little bit late to the party, and there's been a ton of news coming out in the past 2 or 3 days about the direction the game is heading, and a bunch of big updates coming up as well. And we'll definitely be covering all of that and more in the coming days, so do stay tuned. Now, been kind of late to the party because it's got a few things going on in life, but now that things have started to settle again, yeah, here we are. So let's start with the actual balance adjustment units and artifacts here. We got a lot on our plate. Martial Artist Ken, Fallen Cecilia, Spirit Eye Celine, Sylvan Sage Vivian, and Dragon King Sharun for the ML5s. Then we have 5-star Covenant units, right, to go along with the new RTA changes that are coming up to better support RGB drafts and not making everything just a moonlight heaven, right? So Fire Lidica, Fire Kayron, Seaside Bellona, Lethe, Destina, Landy, and Watcher Schuri. Watcher Schuri, obviously ML 4-star, but he's tagged on in the end there. We have quite a few RGB changes, and that is good. You're going to notice that we have a couple limited units in here. We have Landy, Lethe, and Seaside Bellona in this mix, which is good to see. Seaside Bellona hasn't gotten an update at all to her kit since her release, and she was released like the first year of E7. She was the first limited in the entire game, so it's pretty nice. To go in hand with her, actually, we have Reingar Special Drink getting tweaked as well, Wall of Order to go along with the Landy buff, and Fairy Tale for a Nightmare, which is amazing. So yeah, we'll take a look at that and what the changes will mean for the future. Starting off, let's go ahead and jump into the units here. Martial Artist Ken, right? Not too many tweaks. A lot of these units don't need a lot more to do well. They're just kind of on the border. They're on the cusp of being meta. They just need a little bit of a push. So Martial Artist Ken here, his S1 now will always guarantee a critical hit. Normally, if you hit Martial Artist Ken directly, he'll always crit you with his counterattack where he kicks you, right? But when you attack an ally, Martial Artist Ken will counterattack, but he'll punch, right, with his S1 instead. Normally that will not crit because Martial Artist Ken is not built with any crit. He guarantees crits when he does his S2 passive kick against you. The punch, on the other hand, just goes off of his normal crit rate, which is pretty much nothing. So the fact that this now guarantees crits is huge because it makes Martial Artist Ken able to counter things like single target cleave units, things like Eligos, things like Veronica. I fought against a few ML Kens, and the weakness is that when he counters his S1 and he doesn't crit, he doesn't kill, and you can kind of just steamroll and overwhelm him. So I have fought a few ML Kens in the past season, in this last season, but this will definitely make him very, very high on the ban list for like the post bans, right? Because he's gonna be pretty good. They switched up his soul burn as well, so instead of his soul burn increasing damage dealt and always resulting in a critical hit, which kind of sucks because you can only do it on your turn, again, not able to do it on your counter, his soul burn now just increases damage dealt, and the damage dealt is going to be increased, which is probably going to be significant because his S1 already did quite a bit of damage, so this is going to be cool to see how much more damage he can do. The more damage he does, the better, right? Because that's pretty much all he's supposed to do. He also will now penetrate the defense by 50% when he does his Dragon Flame. That's the kick, right? When enemy attacks him, he'll always kick them and then guarantee that crit. So now penetrates defense by even more, which is nice because sometimes he just doesn't hit hard enough. It's hard to build him because he's very stat hungry. He might not need crit, but he needs the attack, the crit damage, he needs the HP and the defense as well. Okay, moving on, we have Fallen Cecilia. So Fallen Cecilia is looking pretty sweet. The last balance update, they had suggested a Fallen Cecilia that people weren't really too happy about. She kind of fell too much in line with like a support unit for ML Peyra, and people didn't like the fact that she had a speed imprint to be used with cleave and aggro teams when she's meant to be a very defensive knight for standard teams. So let's take a look at what they got. They kept the soul burn buff that they were going to go for, which is ignore effect resistance, which I think is pretty good if you're in a slower pace match. Ignoring effect res on important cleansers, high res units, and preventing them from attacking a specific unit, like maybe high res BBKs or high res Amikis, like provoking them and redirecting to FCC over the rest of your team. is really nice, but also, you know, provoking things like high-res cleansers and healers to prevent them from cleansing the rest of the team, to lock them down. It's actually pretty big. And this means you don't really have to build effectiveness with her either. So that's pretty cool. Her passive here says she'll decrease additional damage and fixed damage received by allies from heroes by 50%. So think of your Uberius' Tooth, right? The Amikis that run that. You have all the splash damage and stuff that comes out from like Rocket Punch Gauntlets or 3Fs and all those types of effects. That will be greatly reduced here, which is pretty cool. Now obviously this will not stack with other damage reduction effects, and only the strongest effect will be applied. So if you have something like an Adamant Shield as well, right? Stuff like that, you know, it won't really stack up. Not that this would, because this is such a different type of mechanic, but they have this type of text in here just in case maybe they're going to come out with an artifact or something later, and it just, you know, maybe it'll do something like reduces the additional damage and fixed damage by like 30% or something of that sort. So you can't stack that, right? But in this case, you can use it with stuff like Adamant Shield. They have two different conditions for proccing, so it's not really going to matter all that much. Crimson Armin, though, I don't know if this will stack with Crimson Armin. Probably not, because Crimson Armin reduces damage from all sources, I'm pretty sure, including fixed damage and such. So yeah. Anyway, you can still stack this with Aureus, though, so do keep that in mind. So yeah, next up we have the S3, her Spear of Resentment. This here will dispel all buffs from the opponents before transferring all debuffs inflicted on the caster, which is pretty cool. The cooldown got reduced by 1 turn, and she acquires 1 more soul now too, which is kind of nice. Her old soul burn was okay, like people would just keep putting up skill nulls and stuff onto the team, and it was not bad. I kind of wish that they kept the cannot be countered on this S3 from the previous like suggested patch, the suggested buff, because as it stands right now, if you do your S3 and you get that skill null, when you get the skill nullifier to everybody, if your opponent has a counter unit that AoEs or something like that, you're still gonna get those skill nullifiers broken almost immediately, which sucks. It basically protected you from nothing, right? But yeah, the fact that you could dispel all buffs from the opponent is full buff strip, and you transfer all debuffs inflicted on the caster, that's nice. Just keep in mind that, you know, if you're blinded and you miss, you don't transfer the debuffs and stuff. But it's just weird, because if you're not inflicted with debuffs, you kinda, you know, you're losing out on that effect. So essentially nothing happens with this S3. Nothing happens with this S3 here if you don't have any debuffs. You're just dispelling the opponent's buffs, right? But that also requires you to maybe have some effectiveness. I don't know if you want a whole ton of effectiveness or just a little bit, just enough. Maybe 100, 85 or 100 effectiveness could be okay. Most units nowadays aren't running too much effect resistance, right? The main things are going to be like high res, maybe a BBK or something of that sort they might run into. There are some high res like players out there, like Bellions and Genoas and stuff that you could run into. But again, not very often you run into 200, 300 resist units, besides maybe Infinite Horizon and Katie's. But again, your S1, lock her down, you're good. Next up, we have Spirit Eye Celine. Spirit Eye Celine here is gonna get a bit of a tweak, which is nice because she needs a bit of help. Now, her tweak is actually pretty good because before, she had a 50% chance to use her Nimble Sword instead of Mighty Strike. That's the special animation for her S1. And when she is possessed, the chance is doubled, right? And when she activates Nimble Sword, she'll dispel 1 debuff from herself before attacking. So now, when she uses a skill, as long as it's not a dual attack, and she has a buff, as long as she has a buff, she'll use Nimble Sword. So it's going to be really easy to make sure that she always attacks with that higher damage animation, right? Which is great. So that is a huge change to make her more consistent. The main problem with Spirit Eye Celine was that she was not a consistent damage dealer, right? And so now her Nimble Sword says after granting increased attack for the caster 1 turn, right? She'll attack enemy and all that good stuff. This is great because this granting the extra attack buff is huge for her damage. The main thing she was also lacking besides consistency was consistent damage. Her damage was pretty bad unless you had some sort of extra buffs on her, and she couldn't really self-buff, although losing the self-cleanse does kind of hurt. But this does mean that she'll be more vulnerable to getting controlled. but the fact that you need to keep a buff on her kind of leads me to believe that they want you to use her with more immunity buffers and such like that, so she can't get debuffed to begin with, so she wouldn't need to cleanse, right? And she can be dealing that consistent damage and putting that pressure on the opponent. Her S3 here, she used to dispel all debuffs from herself, but now she's actually a full buff cleanser for the team, which is pretty insane. If you have like a high resist Spirit Eye Celine that's more fast, right, you build a little bit less damage because of the attack buff that you grant yourself and the more consistent Nimble Sword procs. That could be a build that can happen. A faster Spirit Eye Celine to cleanse after maybe some things like New Moon Luna or such go, right? That could be a pretty decent strategy, who knows? But yeah, you don't need a high resist Spirit Eye Celine, right? As long as she's not getting stunned or slept or anything of that sort, you will be able to just full buff cleanse your allies. Even if they have unbuffable, you can use her S3 and grant them the immortality buff, which makes her a really good utility sub DPS type of unit for the team. So very glad to see that she's getting these changes. She's one of my favorite characters in the game in terms of design, so I'm very happy. Hope I get to use her because my Lifesteal Spirit Eye Celine is like 260 speed, 260 something speed. She is itching for a fight. Alright, let's go ahead and move on here to Sylvan Sage Vivian. Yeah, she is going to be getting a skin this season, so hopefully this is going to be a good buff. Instead of increasing speed of herself for 1 turn when she uses her S1, she'll now gain 15% combat readiness for that turn cycling, which is great. The more you turn cycle with Sylvan Sage Vivian, the more you're going to be increasing this attack effect by 20%, which can stack up to 3 times, right? So you could just S1, S1, S1. If you build her faster, maybe not necessarily on lifesteal, maybe speed build is the way to go here. You stack up her her attack early on and then unleash your S3 or your Soulburn S1, and it could be really devastating to the opponent. The other thing is, it says on the caster's turn, when the focus is full, she activates the same skill as an extra attack. This is even better, okay? Even better because this combat readiness increase will stack. You can get up to 30% combat readiness by doing that S2 twice, and you'll be increasing your attack 2 times right off the bat. So if you start off with full focus at the start of the match, right, which you will at the start of the first battle, fully recovers focus. You start with 5 focus. If you play her in a faster team, a tempo-based team, aggressive, cleave type of team, you will be able to not only turn cycle quite a bit. That 30% combat readiness, is huge, but your first S1 is going to increase your attack by 20%. That means your second S1, when she does the same attack twice, you already have that 20% boost to your damage. You're going to hit again. It's going to hit hard, right? And that's really nice. So everything else with her passive is kind of staying the same, which is good. She'll still consume focus when suffering damage equivalent to 30% of more of her max health. So you do got to keep that in mind. You want her at full focus now, but they're helping alleviate that a little bit, right? But by giving her S3 the ability to acquire a focus whenever you use it. So the S3 now also gains focus, which is very nice, and they did increase the cooldown. They increased the cooldown by 1 turn, but instead of giving her this useless effect where the damage dealt increases with more allies, which never made any sense to me. I don't like these types of effects, right? The more you're winning, the less damage it does. Why? Why would you have that kind of effect? So they're replacing that with the fact that she can decrease skill cooldowns of all allies by 1 turn, for whenever she uses her S3. That is amazing because you also have things like Last Rider Crow, whose S3 does the same thing, right? You have Laya, whose S2 does the same thing. Just imagine a tanky, bruisery type of team, Sylvan Sage Vivian, Last Rider Crow, Laya. Oh my god, guys, you are going to be spitting out S2s, S3s, all the special skills, just one after the other. It is crazy. And the fact that Sylvan Sage Vivian can last on the field for quite a while due to her passive here, you can hold on to that S3 for a very, very good moment, an ideal moment where you need to reduce that cooldown, get that S3 up on another unit, and then finish the game off. So she is turning into a really strong utility unit, and this will definitely put her back on the map as one of the more viable units to use as a DPS that has resilience and staying power, right, on the field. So definitely very happy to see that as well. Next up, Dragon King Sharun. Oh boy, did you know she can counter more? Not a lot of people did, but Dragon King Sharun is really good against units that prevent movement, so stun, sleep, fear, all that good stuff. The problem was that she could only cleanse it when she took a turn. At the start of the turn, she dispels these debuffs. So her buff now makes it so that she will, at the end of someone's turn, when an ally is inflicted with a debuff that prevents movement, she not only grants Cascade to everyone, but she also dispels all debuffs immediately, which prevent movement. And then she increases her combat readiness by 40% instead of 30%, right? So that is really good. Not only does it help turn cycle, okay, but it also makes it so you essentially just can't be stunned or slept or feared or any of that stuff. Keep in mind, this can still only activate once per turn, which is why the 40% combat readiness is huge. It allows her to jump up in combat readiness, take that turn again, and reset her passive. And so next turn, if you get slept by DDR, stunned by somebody, you can, cleanse that and give everyone that Cascade again. Cascade's also getting a buff. It's a huge buff, by the way. 2,500 fixed damage is now going up to 4,000 fixed damage. So it's a really good thing that FCC is a thing, because otherwise, this type of damage is gonna be insane. I don't know if they're buffing Cascade just because they're buffing FCC. It's kind of counterintuitive. You're buffing the true damage, fixed damage, but then you're also making it so that you can nullify it. Kind of just clashes a little bit, right? Just a little bit, just saying. Anyway, obviously it's just one skill. Cascade does, by the way, affect Tori. Tori does grant herself Cascade, so it is a slight buff to Tori as well, which is kind of cool to see. The other thing is, with her S3, she's no longer going to be getting this combat readiness increase of the caster by 50%. Now she's actually going to be getting a chance to inflict cannot buff, unable to be buffed. So that's actually not too bad. There's some units that, unbuffable, I've been saying for many seasons now, have been the most powerful debuff in the game. It's just such a powerful debuff right now. Preventing the opponent from buffing prevents things like immortality, prevents things from like getting barriers, prevents them from getting any damage increases or damage mitigation effects like increased attack or increased defense. It's pretty big, and Dragon King Sharun being able to turn cycle super quickly is also very, very nice. The other thing that you have to keep in mind here is that Dragon King Sharun is going to be switching from a Virgo star sign into a Scorpio star sign. And for reference, Scorpio star signs, we don't really have too many of them, honestly. Most of the Soul Weavers that you know are like Pisces healers like Ruel or Blood Moon Haste or Young Senya. So yeah, it is going to be quite interesting to see what the Scorpio constellation is going to be helping her with. But yeah, she's going to be losing this Virgo constellation. They say it's going to be better for her in the long run. Right, increasing her base speed, enabling more disruption with wider range of battle scenarios. So she did have abysmal base speed. Her base speed was terrible. I think it was like 106 or something. So it is going to be nice to see her get a little boost in terms of her speed stat. It's going to help with the turn cycling, going to couple really well with the combat readiness increases that she's going to be getting, right? So yeah. Good to see that they're able to change star signs like this for characters. It's looking good for future balance patches where we can hopefully see constellation changes for some units that maybe get buffed and stuff where, their star signs no longer match the stats that they really, really want. So good to see. It's like, for example, some units like I believe Fire Charlotte was a unit that she awakens into crit rate. Yeah, Fire Charlotte awakens into crit rate with her Leo star sign, but she guarantees crits anyway, so you never build her with crit. So it's a wasted awakening. So hopefully, when they buff Charlotte or units like that in the future, they'll be able to change those star signs too. Okay, moving on, we have Fire Lidica. Oh boy, guys, Fire Lidica is gonna be nuts, absolutely nuts. She's gonna be my new Lidica, essentially. She is Lidica, by the way, just faster, way faster. Lidica has one of the highest base speeds in the entire game, and she is going to be looking amazing after this. You're going to notice that there's a lot of bleed effects that are going to be talked about here, but that's because the bleed effects are actually going to get buffed, right? All those bleed, burn, things like bombs and such are going to get buffed in the next RTA Frenzy update, so we'll see how that plays out for Lidica. But she has a 124 base speed, which is amazing. Faithless Lidica, by the way, I think has like a 114 base speed or 112, something like that. Her base speed is abysmal. Yeah, 114 base speed. So yeah, it is pretty bad. So Lidica having like basically a 10 speed stat, 10 base speed higher is amazing. You can build 300 plus speed Lidicas pretty easily, for reference. So yeah, instead of decreasing combat readiness by 10% on her S1, she now has an 80% chance to inflict 2 bleeding effects for 2 turns in her awakened version, and at the end of the turn, she detonates bleeding effects inflicted on the target. So that S1 is actually going to be huge for just doing the DPS part of her kit. Now you don't have to build it with like crit rate or anything wild like that. The bleeding effects are already really nice to detonate and deal that additional damage, and they increase the damage that they decrease the damage that was dealt here with the S1 to probably compensate for the fact that these bleed detonations are going to be really hard hitting in RTA with the frenzy mechanic. Her Thorn Bush is her S2. This is the thing that attacks all of the opponents, and it used to be that you would take 10 souls to ignore effect resistance, and that was one of the few units that you only needed 10 souls to ignore effect res for. They realized that that was probably not going to be a good idea with these changes, so they like nerfed it a little bit. It's a 20 soul burn to ignore effect res, pretty much like in line with everyone else nowadays, and they did increase the cooldown of this. Now, that's because they're allowing her to turn cycle, so the cooldown is essentially staying the same. She inflicts resource depletion on all enemies by 60%, that means fighting spirit and focus, before she attacks. She does this before she attacks. Then she decreases buff durations by 1 turn and inflicts bind for 2 turns. Bind means that they can't act outside of their own turn, right? So it's pretty big. For each target, increases combat readiness of the caster by 25%. This is just like Faithless Lidica's skill, except you don't need a crit with Lidica. Faithless Lidica, all her things need her to crit. You have to use a crit necklace, and that was really what held her back. Having to have a specific main stat necklace that also had a ton of speed, which is hard for people to get. But Lidica can be built with bulk. You can build her with attack for damage to scale with her bleeds. Like, there's so many things you can do with Lidica here, and she's essentially becoming a Faithless Lidica, right? She's decreasing buff durations by 1 turn. Now, we'll go to her EEs, which also changed, but that's going to help out in a bit. Her S3, Public Execution, which is a fantastic name for a skill, by the way, she would attack the enemy, one enemy, and inflicts decreased defense for 2 turns, instead of decreased speed for 2 turns, right? She is able to decrease their combat readiness by 100%, and she grants skill nullifier to all allies. This is basically like Faithless Lidica, except Lidica will reset the opponent's skills fully, but here you'll just push them all the way to the back lines, essentially saying, yeah, I'm not going to decrease your skill cooldowns, but you're not going to get a turn. We're just not going to let you get a turn, and you have decreased defense, so before you get a turn, you're probably going to die. It's a really good way to set up for units that come afterwards, so it's pretty cool. The other thing is, when the target is inflicted with bind, she ignores effect resistance. This is huge because the main problem with Fire Lidica always has been that there's too many 15% checks. Normally, here, when you attack the enemy, you decrease buff durations by 1 turn. So if your opponent had immunity and you hit them, there's a chance they can 15% the strip. If they 15% the strip, none of the other effects afterwards matter because you can't inflict them, right? Except granting yourself the skill nullifier. So, let's say you pass that 15% check. Then the next 15% check is decreasing the combat readiness by 100%. If they resist that, you can still get the other things, right, like decreased speed and stuff, but then most of the power of the S3 goes away because you didn't push them back, the threat is still there. After that, there's a chance that they can 15% the speed down, and while it's not as huge, it's just another thing on top of something else that can go wrong. 3 15% checks, the chance of you actually getting all 3 effects is actually really low, way lower than you would expect, right? So it is terrible. But yeah, now the fact that she can S2 bind the opponents, right? You can soul burn, ignore effect res, bind everybody for 2 turns. Then you can S3 somebody and ignore res and inflict the defense down and decrease combat readiness by 100%. That's huge. And the fact that you grant skill null to all allies. Lidica is going to be an absolutely amazing and essential tool for a lot of faster players out there. Now, the main thing is, unlike Lidica, you can't really bridge with her, except you can. Fenris has an artifact where if you attack, right, like all allies on the opponent's side, or sorry, all enemies on the opponent's side, you have a percent chance to push up your team. If you max out that artifact, it's a 100% chance to push up your team. You might see Briarwatch Assyrias out there using that artifact. So Lidica can become a really strong opener. So I'm probably gonna need to snag me a Fenris artifact so I can use Lidica at her full potential here. It's looking good. All right. We're not done with Lidica yet though, because her exclusive equipments have also changed, right? The increased damage dealt by Wild Rose, which is garbage, now increases the chance of inflicting bleed by 20%, which means you now have a 100% chance, because I believe the base is 80%. The second skill is, instead of increasing Wild Rose's base decreased combat readiness by 5%, that's the S1, instead of pushing him back from 10% chance, it was a 15%, whatever. It changes it now so it inflicts restrict on all enemies for 2 turns when you use Thornbush. This one's huge because if you're using Fire Lidica and your opponent has stuff like, for example, like a General Purgus or an Empyrean Ilanov, or those units that can push other things up, they can't anymore. Empyrean Ilanov getting pushed up would have been a huge threat. She could have just S3'd and cleansed and everyone would have gotten the Indomitable buff. Not anymore, right? Not anymore. This will allow you to S2. You can ignore res, by the way, using this as part of the S2 effect. You can soul burn, ignore effect res, put the restrict, put the bind on the opponent, and boom, suddenly you're in full control of the match. Restrict is also really good because when you push back your opponent with the S3, the 100% combat readiness decrease, the restrict prevents them from pushing themselves up. There's no Warhorn shenanigans, there's no, like, again, Empyrean Ilanov type passive shenanigans, there's none of that stuff going on. No allies pushing them up either. It's really good, right? So this is probably the one I'm going to be going with. Now, the other exclusive equipment is also really good. Instead of increasing Rosebush's spell buff by 1, it decreases the buff durations by an additional 1% when you use a Thornbush. So when you use that S2, instead of decreasing the duration by 1, it's going to be by 2, which is nice because later on the matches, if you're going to be using it again, you can strip your opponent's newly applied buffs. Most buffs are 2-turn buffs. The main thing is, if you're playing really fast and aggressive with her, the only real buff you really care about removing is the first turn immunity. So first turn immunity from immunity set is only 1 turn immunity. So yeah, normally if you forego this third effect and you go for the second effect here, probably going to be better if you're playing aggressively and faster. If you're playing slower, maybe you might consider this third effect, but I think most players should gravitate towards the second one if you're playing fast. Alright, so that's been a lot for Lidica. I think she's one of the biggest winners of the entire update here. So let's go with Kayron. Kayron is actually getting a pretty interesting little tweak. His Void Slash, his S1, is going to just have increased damage dealt, and his Soulburn damage is going to be increased as well when he takes his turn, which is nice for finishing off opponents. Normally you'd use your Kayron Soulburn S1 to finish off your opponents when you take your turn, right? After you've been immortal, your opponent's been lapping you, your Kayron's been countering them, they're all really low, you would clean up with this. So that's kind of nice to see. Now the other thing is that whenever he got to lethal damage, he was going to die, he lives with 1 HP, he gets himself immortality and increased evasion for 1 turn. Well, they're boosting that up to 2-turn evasion, so it's actually kind of nice because I mean, the immortality is still going to be 1 turn, but the 2-turn evasion makes it so that there's a chance that your opponents will miss when they're trying to strip your buffs and such, especially with units that have to hit you to strip the buffs. So that's kind of cool. And if you're running Kayron on something like Double-Edged Decrescent, which a lot of people do, increases your counterattack chance, right, when you're hit, and it stacks with, like, counter sets, right? They're not additive, but they do stack together. The thing is, when you do that, you'll have quite a bit of evasion, 70% evasion, and keeping this evasion for 2 turns allows you to, again, survive. But you might be wondering, well, it doesn't really matter, because if you survive, you still have 1 HP, the immortality's gonna run out, you're gonna die. Not necessarily. His S3 now is going to absorb some of the damage dealt as health, and his S3 does quite a bit of damage. They actually increased the amount of damage that he's done, and they're making it easier for you to build damage by giving you crit rate imprints. Yeah, that's right. Attack imprints are usually inferior to crit rate imprints just because crit rate, look at this, 16.8% is equal to more than 3 max crit rolls, right? Because you can get 5, 5, and 5 with 3 crit rolls, right? 15% crit. This is more than 3 crit rolls. 18% attack, for reference, is like getting 3 mid rolls, 6%, 6%, 6%. If you got 3 max roll attacks, it's 8 and 8 and 8, right? So this is so much more worth it. The crit rate imprint is insane. So it's good to see this right here. Gonna help with Kayron builds quite a bit. And yeah, so his S3 resets, by the way, keep that in mind. It resets whenever his S2 gets procced. So when that happens, you get to S3, deal a bunch of damage, you're going to heal, and then you still keep that evasion. You're not going to lose it, which is wonderful. Alright, so yeah, that's Kayron. Again, I don't know if he's really going to be that useful. You already have units like Amiki, you already have units like BBK that already have such good staying power, like double immortality from BBK, double immortality from Amiki. Is Kayron going to compete with some lifesteal and 2-turn evasion? Not sure. Not really sure about that. But again, we'll have to see it in practice. He does look like a really fun unit though, and I would definitely try to use him if I could. Seaside Bellona is the next unit here. Instead of redirecting damage, which is one of her kind of signature abilities, right, to keep her staying alive as long as possible, so she would damage the front ally instead. It's like a better Aureus effect for her. And she also had a 50% chance to decrease defense. Well, now that's been changed to a 75% chance to inflict decreased defense, and now for every surviving ally, she decreases damage suffered by 10%. She no longer shares that damage with the foremost ally, which means you have more team building options with her. You don't have to be like, hey, I need to put this knight in the front, and that knight, guys, whoever shares damage with Seaside Bellona usually eats so much damage. They go down really, really quick. So now, for every surviving ally, so at the start of the battle, if you have 4 units on your side, it's going to be a 40% damage reduction, right? As your units die, she becomes more vulnerable, which is a pretty cool effect to see. But it means starting out with 40% damage reduction, that is huge. I'm assuming that this does include herself, right? It doesn't say anything about excluding herself, so it is safe to assume that she is included here. So yeah, 40% damage reduction is amazing. And they also increase the damage dealt on her S3, and instead of having this a critical hit will increase damage dealt, right, then now her S3 dispels all buffs before a chance to inflict buff and unbuffable and unhealable for 2 turns, right? So this is pretty cool, especially because her S3, I believe, ignores resistance. So if you're able to just soul burn that S3, you dispel everything. Again, unbuffable, one of the strongest debuffs in the meta right now, and unhealable, which is also pretty decent from time to time. This is a pretty nice buff to Seaside Bellona. Very minor tweak, but again, something that is very impactful and I think could allow her to see more play. Again, with the RGBs being able to deal equal damage to each other, and you're not going to get screwed over by elemental disadvantage now, Seaside Bellona is looking good. This also means, by the way, you don't have to build her with crit rate anymore. You could build her with straight up just attack and a bunch of bulk. You don't need crit rate, you don't need crit damage, you can just deal splash damage with her, right? And we'll talk about that when we get to her artifact, which was also buffed. Next up, we have Lethe. Lethe here, man, I did not expect them to buff Lethe, but well, it's summer on the horizon in a few months. I mean, I guess it's pretty cool. Currently not even spring yet, but hey, getting a little ahead of ourselves here. Alright, so the main thing is that she's losing this effect here, where the damage dealt increases proportional to the caster's max health, and the amount recovered increases proportional to the target's max health. This is when you do your attacks and you activate the Call of the Abyss, right? The Call of the Abyss is when you summon that big Kraken out, and this is the amount of damage that she's going to be doing, okay? So what they're doing is this. They're saying that, hey, when you activate the Call of the Abyss and you inflict extinction, recover health of all allies, you also increase combat readiness by 50%. It'll help her turn cycle. When you normally get the 3rd stack on the opponent, you have to, keep looping back around, keep stacking, more and more omens on your opponents before you can trigger your S2 again, the Call of the Abyss. This is going to allow her to turn cycle much faster and allow her to kind of snowball into more and more kills, which is kind of nice. She doesn't really have too many ways to turn cycle outside of this, but again, that's what you have allies for, that's what you have teammates for. She's still really weak to injury too, so keep that in mind. But the other thing is, the amount that's recovered and damage dealt is now going to be proportional to the caster's max health. So instead of recovering damage proportional to a target's max health, let's say it's like 10, just for example, let's say it's 30%. 30% the max health, right? So the reason why that kind of sucked is because you'd have a set amount of healing. So if you had like 10,000 health, you'll always get 3,000 healing, no matter what. But Lethe is built with a ton of HP. You have 25k, 26k, 28k HP, 30k HP Lethe's. So then that 30% there, instead of healing at 3,000 health, will always heal 9,000 health because it's based on Lethe's health, right? So if you have really squishy units, you can get full healed instead of getting only 30% of your health back, which is kind of meaningless to those squishier units, right? So Lethe is actually going to be really, really nice here, and the damage dealt is getting increased too, helping her secure more kills. So hope to see her back, but again, I think injury is just a little too strong. You have, you know, earth units like Alencia out there, Mort's out there that can kind of be devastating as well. Her losing turns to Mort is huge. You can't get those omen stacks as fast. She needs to hit S1s to get omens, so you won't be getting that. And the fact that ML Shu now stealths and Lethe is only a single target damage dealer, that also really doesn't bode well for her. So if she is going to be used, she's going to be a late pick. I just really don't see this being enough for her in the long run here for this upcoming meta. But next up, Destination, aka Destina. The amount increased as Soulburn healing is increased with her S1, which is fair. Her S1 is going to be used quite often, especially if you're using a counter build on Destina. It's going to be quite important for you to sustain your team through that. Now, instead of having Spirit's Blessing for 2 turns at the start of the battle, it's going to be 3 turns, which is kind of nice to see. And instead of reviving all dead allies with 20% of their health, it's now going to be 30% of their health, allowing them to have a bit more staying power on the field, which is kind of nice, especially because if you're really far back on that combat readiness bar when you get revived, you're kind of screwed and out of luck. They did do a really huge favor for her here though. They decreased the cooldown of her S3 from 5 turns to 4 turns. Usually in a match, by the time you do your Destina S3, the match is over. As in, like, you'll never get another S3 again before the match is done. When you S3, that's the only S3 you get, whether you're healing up your team, full cleansing your team, or you're reviving your team. It's pretty much it. And her S2 is kind of nice because you can like use your S2 to push herself up, right, and get that combat readiness onto her. But again, the issue with that is that you have to do that so many times. Her S2 is on a relatively short cooldown. It's kind of nice, but getting that S3 back up is always a pain. This is going to help quite a bit, and would love to start seeing her again in some more standard type games. Diane has already been making a comeback with her buffs. Hopefully Destina will as well. Next up, we have Landy, so another limited unit here to join Seaside Bellona. They just increased the damage dealt on her S1, which is good. She did need a bit of damage increase there. I want to see how much damage it is. Hopefully it's not insignificant, but it is good to see that she's getting a little bit of a boost to keep up with how tanky units are. Her whole role is to be a tank buster unit, right? She punishes slow teams by giving your team speed buffs and combat readiness and the momentum to keep turn cycling, while punishing your opponent for having buffs to begin with by gaining fighting spirit. The main thing now is that now at the start of the battle, she grants stealth for 1 turn. So this is pretty good in general. It's like you don't have to use guiding light on her. Even if you don't plan on putting a guiding light on her after this anyway, to maintain stealth, she can still be a fantastic opener. Landy's base speed is not terrible, and I've seen some 300 plus speed Landys as well. So now you don't have to run guiding light. You can run her on damage artifacts. You can run her on the artifacts like what's his face? The one I mentioned earlier that gives combat readiness for rangers when they do an AoE attack, right? That one that Lidica can use. So it's going to be pretty cool to see. So yeah, Landy is looking pretty decent. Again, a slight tiny buff, but it's going to be pretty impactful in my opinion because she has a variety of different builds, including counter builds that you can use with her. Alright, next up we have Watcher Schuri. So Watcher Schuri is going to be just straight up always penetrating target's defense. This is pre-awakening. It used to be like 80%. I don't know why they did this. But after you awaken now, he's going to have an increased hit chance by 50% when he uses his S3, which is massive. Because with this, he's able to hit evasion units, and there are evasion units out there that, you know, are really squishy, and Watcher Schuri is gonna penetrate defense fully. He doesn't really care. He deals massive amounts of damage. You can lower the amount of damage that your Watcher Schuri does and increase his speed, and he could actually be a pretty decent little bridge unit as well, right? You have someone else that could push the Watcher Schuri up. Watcher Schuri might be on something like Sachet, so if he's on the Sachet artifact, when he gets pushed up and he kills somebody, he'll push up the rest of the team, so you can kind of snowball that momentum into some you know, more wins. The other thing is just having an extra hit chance unit, any unit that has extra hit chance like this, that's a speed imprint, is very, very welcome. There are basically no units that increase speed for your team with imprints that would also have a good chance of hitting things like a Fire Flan, for example. So this is kind of nice. Alright, so moving on here with his exclusive equipment. Look at this, a little bit of a change, decreasing finishing shot by 1 turn, so S3, that's going to be gone. You're not really getting a second S3 up ever. Now you get to increase the hit chance by 50% more. So when I mentioned the Fire Flan earlier, it's because of this. When you couple this EE with his skill here, you have a 100% chance to hit units, which means all evasion units now fall to Watcher Schuri. And again, those evasion units are usually pretty squishy, right? Think about all of them out there, Light Aid and Riley, even though they're not really too meta right now. You have things like Fire Flan, for example, the most meta evasion unit at the moment. Yeah, being able to just use Watcher Schuri and one-shot the Fire Flan, as well as being a speed imprint, makes it so nice, so that when you're fighting Fire Flans and you're playing aggressively, you get the speed imprint from him, and you get that extra hit chance. He's not as good as Eligos, it's arguable. Eligos is better in the long run with damage and his dual attacks and his overall firepower and his ability to control the team with the S3, pushback, defense down, all that stuff. But Watcher Schuri, just being a speed imprint, already kind of mitigates a lot of that. So they're both on kind of equal grounds here. Do you need the speed to race? If you do, Watcher Schuri. If you don't, Eligos is pretty good, right? But this is kind of cool to see. Very nice for Watcher Schuri. Okay, next up, let's go into the artifacts, right? We've already gone quite a while with this balance update, but it's a huge one here. And hopefully you've been liking it so far. If you have, do be sure to subscribe to the channel for future news coverage and also just my opinions on all these things as a usually high champion player in the top 2000s. So we got Reingar's special drink that's gonna get buffed, and the additional damage amount is gonna be increased. So normally you do a lot of splash damage with drink. Now that the damage is increased and she no longer relies on crits, Seaside Bellona can actually again just be built with pure attack and bulk, making her so much easier to build and so much more effective as well. So I'm really glad that personally I didn't go down the route of recrafting some gear, because I was thinking about it. A lot of units right now in the meta are fire, and ice is not really known for its DPS units most of the time. So I was thinking rebuilding my SSB, and now that she's gotten this tweak, I think it's a lot easier, and I'm so glad I didn't invest a lot of resources into crafting specific gear just for her. Alright, now we have Wall of Order, Landy's artifact. This is actually going to be really good for Landy herself, but at the start of the turn, for each buff granted to an enemy, she now has a 6 to 12% chance to grant herself the increased attack buff, the greater attack buff, right? Before it used to be a 5 to 10% chance, okay? So before, if you had like a plus 15 version of this, it would just be a 7.5% chance to increase the greater attack. This now, in between here, you have an 8% chance, so overall still a bit of a bump, which is cool to see. The main thing comes from this. Before it used to be at the end of the turn grants a barrier equal to 50% of the caster's attack for 1 turn. Now, it's essentially a better guiding light. At the end of the turn, you have a 50 to 100% chance to grant stealth for 1 turn. I know guiding light grants the stealth for 2 turns, but it has a chance not to proc. The 80% chance to proc means 20% chance not to. And guys, this is huge. At the end of the turn, if you have a maxed out Wall of Order, you'll always grant that stealth. That is amazing. It doesn't matter if you have 2-turn stealth, right? 2-turn stealth doesn't make a difference because when you get hit and take damage, you lose stealth, whether you had 2 turns left or 1 turn left on the buff. Wall of Order essentially became a better guiding light, which is kind of crazy to think about. So yeah, that's something that I did not expect to happen, especially with Guiding Light being such a good artifact and used on pretty much all rangers. Okay, the last thing here is Fairy Tale for a Nightmare. Fairy Tale Tenebrier's artifact. So it used to have a 60% chance to dispel a buff from the target. It's now boosted to a 40 to 80% chance. So now if you have a plus 15 artifact, it's still 60% chance. But if you have a plus 30 artifact, it's up to an 80% chance, which is like Aila Violin levels, right, of good in terms of stripping buffs, which is great. This is just a way better Aila Violin now. The other thing is the fixed damage dealt is now increased from 750 to 1,500 damage to 1,000 to 2,000 fixed damage. So again, at plus 15, you'll be at 1,500, which is right in the middle here, but at a plus 30, 2,000 fixed damage, guys, that is huge. Imagine a Champion Zerato, right? I really wish they buffed Champion Zerato here, but Champion Zerato with the debuffs, right? Hitting back, Fairy Tale for a Nightmare proccing, it's pretty nice. Archdemon, also, by the way, really good with this. Archdemon being able to strip buffs here and then deal fixed damage when she does that extra attack, also huge as well. So yeah, this is really exciting to see all these buffs on the horizon, and I definitely cannot wait. This is going to be going live on April 10th, so by the time you see this video, in a little less than 2 weeks. But, you know, let me know what you guys think about this balance patch adjustment. Who do you think's the biggest winner? Personally, I think it's Fire Lidica. She is surprising me with all the things that she can now do with that kit. And when it comes to ML5s, I'm not really too sure who I think the biggest winner is. I think Sylvan Sage Vivian is looking pretty good for aggressive teams. Spirit Eye Celine's gonna be super fun. I really can't decide. Fallen Cecilia though, the biggest thing. What do you guys think about her? But with that being said though, guys, let me know what you guys think in the comments down below, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.